I've just been watching a very good but very depressing documentary about uh, Phil Spector. So,
Oh,
so you need to lift the mood.
it's interesting because I was just listening to the Brian Garrett interview you did where you talked about Phil Spector.
Oh, that's totally passed me by. Was I really doing that?
Yeah, yeah, or like I think they'd mentioned like it has, or it had gotten out somewhere that like Spector was like an influence on their like EP that they put out
Oh
recently or
yeah, no, I
something,
do.
but it was like a miscommunication. I think you asked him about it. I thought that was coincidental.
No, that was quite an awkward moment. I have just remembered that he was quite an intense man. He was
Yeah,
really nice, but he was definitely intense.
yeah, he seems like he would be probably.
Um, no, listen, well, it's dead good to speak to you. Like I,
Good
I
to speak
love
to you as well.
I love all your records. And I'm looking forward to seeing you when you get to the UK. Is that
Oh, cool, thank
March?
you. Yeah, February we're gonna be there pretty soon, like in a couple weeks.
Amazing. When was the last time you were here?
Ooh, 2019,
Oh, the
I
old the,
think,
the old the old
or
world.
maybe 2018. I think it might have been 2018. Yeah, the old world. Yeah, we DIY'd it. We just booked it ourselves. Our now manager and guitar player just sent some emails and DIY'd in 30 days in UK and Europe, and that was a long time ago. So this is our first time going over, kind of like with a little bit more of an infrastructure. So we're excited. And we're bookending it with the UK, which I like, which I'm stoked about. So we're like starting with a handful of shows in the UK and then doing Europe and then coming back and ending with a handful of shows in the UK. So
I was going to say when you said 30 days, I was like, is there 30 places to play in the UK? But you mean you're
no,
gonna?
you're doing both. Yeah. You always
Yeah.
do both because it's like you fly in to UK usually and then you take a ferry or the Channel or something and you go to mainland Europe and then drive around from there. You find a Brit who's willing to drive you around in their van in
We,
Europe for a little while.
yeah, you were saying though that this time, there's more of an infrastructure. Like, what do you mean by that?
I think just like there's at least like it's our second time going back, so at least in the UK the shows are a little bit bigger. They're actually booked like with an agent and stuff like that, and there's like some promotion like around a handful of the shows, and even like us talking now, there's like some effort being put into like us letting people know that we're gonna be there. The last time we were in New Europe, it was more so like very much I don't know, the same way that a lot of DIY bands start out. It's very much just like a challenge. Like, can we do this? Like, can we go book a tour ourselves and do it? And this time, I think we just get to like care more about like comfort a little bit more and like book hotel rooms and like bring a couple more people as like staff to help with like crew. Like we're actually bringing our guitar tech with us this time, which is going to like help and make the shows go a lot smoother. And we were able to, like really pick like a driver that we trust and that we like a lot, who's going to like tour manage for us and stuff. Where as the last time, our first time in the UK and in Europe, it was very much just our first time. We were just down to see what happened and didn't really have any expectations. So it's cool to be going back and just to feel a little bit more informed, I guess, and to feel a little bit more prepared. Not even necessarily just because of like the show's being booked by agents or because the show's being bigger, but just like us personally as a band, like we feel like we have more of an infrastructure over there now, I think, than we did before, which is it's harder to do internationally just because it's like we're not from there and we don't get to spend as much time. Like we're road dogs over here in the US and have been for a long time. So like we've got friends in every city and we've got a route and a plan of how to get from whatever city to whatever city. But international, it's a lot less familiar. And so, yeah, I think we're just like a lot more excited this time instead of nervous to be going back. So
When were your first shows over here?
I think it was January of 2018.
Okay, okay. Um, do you dig it? I mean, all Americans do is moan about our food.
Oh, the food. I mean, honestly, it's interesting because, like, on one hand, you know what I'll find is I'll say this. I think it boils down to the fact that like you guys don't salt and pepper the food a lot of the time beforehand, and And our tour manager, Summers, explained this to me, and maybe it's just like a Weatherspoon thing, like I don't know. But
Yeah,
I was always like, dude, like why is there no salt and pepper like on my eggs? Like that's just like in the US, like you can get yelled at if like there's no seasoning like on your food, like that's a travesty. And he's like, you just do it yourself. So everybody gets what they want.
right,
And it's
right.
just like the right amount because you know, like you never know. It's like a health thing and like a preference thing together. And I was like, I guess that kind of makes sense. So I think like a lot of Americans, like our food is very heavily like over seasoned. Like I'll definitely admit that. Like our fast food and like a lot of our restaurant food is like heavily seasoned. And so like we go over there and there's like you have to put your own salt and pepper on stuff. And like you have to just put hot sauce on everything. And people are like, this is crazy. Like I can't believe I have to do this. Um,
Yeah,
but I don't know. At the same time, like you guys also have access to um, like some types of food is a lot more, I think, like common. Like Indian food is a lot more common, and I think like African food is a little bit more common in the UK,
yeah,
which I
yeah,
think is really cool because like we don't like have that like all the time, and like oh yeah, like the Mediterranean food and like the Middle Eastern food that is like open late night that you can get like that's super cool. Like we don't have like falafel places in most parts of the US that are like open late night. Like we don't have a lot of those like super cool like wrap places or like kebab places or like doner and stuff like that. So and I
yeah,
actually kind of like it.
yeah.
So it's interesting and like I don't know, fish and chips is like dope. Like with the mashed peas, like it's not bad. And so I think yeah, I mean the more you like complain about it, I think the more it'll bother you.
Do
Um,
do you eat meat?
I do, yeah. So I think none of us are super picky. Like we all like to eat, like in mom jeans especially. Like we're all big eaters. Like going out to eat and like searching for restaurants and stuff is definitely something that is on our list of things that we like to do when we're traveling. So um,
I definitely feel like for bands, finding nice places to eat has replaced finding somewhere to score cocaine and have an orgy.
absolutely, you know, I think so, you know, and I mean, you know, like we've never really been big partiers, I guess. It's like so we like it's just always been that way for us, I guess. We're never really like replacing partying with food. Like food has always been the party. Like we've always been in search of the best burrito on the West Coast. Like that's been true since, you know, we were 17 years old. And I think there's just like it's just at least for us as a band, like it's just very much built into the DNA of like how we like to travel as individuals too, especially like our bass player Sam, like he's just a big foodie. Our drummer Austin is like a big foodie. I think
Right.
myself and Bart are like less super duper into food as like Sam and Austin are, but like they both actively when they travel, like with their partners and with their families, like search out good places to go get food and stuff like that. So, and yeah, I do think it's a much more positive and like wholesome kind of thing. And it's also, I think, in the context of like traveling with a bunch of people, like food is one of those things that everybody needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And like with the exception of like drinking and guitar strings, like that's the one thing that everybody in the band can usually agree on.
Yeah.
All it is like I need to eat and I need to get food. So it's like whether or not, you know, when you've only got a couple hours to spare every other day to really do something for yourself on the road. I think it's pretty easy to come to a consensus to get everybody in the van to go to a cool place to eat, especially if anybody's even just a little bit excited about it too. Like that's all it really takes is for one person in the band to be like, "Yo, I researched this spot. They're supposed to be well known for this or like really good for this or whatever. So like let's go do that." And everybody's like, "All right, I'm in," and then we get excited and it always turns out like I've just had some of the best meals of like my entire life, not even like realizing that I was about to walk in and have that, being on tour with this band in some pretty crazy places too. And I think yeah, it's pretty wild, like some like how great that experience can be of just like eating a fantastic meal with like people that you really like.
Oh yeah, totally,
It's up
totally.
there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you sort of look at the fallen rock stars of rock's past, and you go, if you'd been for like jerk chicken, then you might still be around. So
Yeah, who knows,
there's
man.
there's a lesson to be learned in there.
Yeah.
There was actually an article the other day that ran over here that made a real fuss on Twitter that I believe it was titled "What's the Deal with American Chocolate?"
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's loads of Brits who. I mean, your chocolate doesn't have a great reputation over here. In fact,
I don't
actually,
think it does.
yeah, I think there was something they'd broken down the ingredients in like Hershey's, and there was some like enzyme in there, or some kind of chemical that they found in vomit, and I was like, well, that's Hershey's ruined for me, which I quite like actually, but I feel like that was a little bit of like some sort of kickback after years of having our food criticized by Americans.
Dude, I mean, I believe it. I believe it honestly. I don't know anything about our chocolate having a bad reputation over there. I just do know about y'all's chocolate having a good reputation over here. So I think
Yes,
that
yeah,
does
yeah,
say probably some of the same things. But I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, America's a wild, dude. I was like a sociology major in college, and like I had to take a bunch of like classes about like the food industry and like all that. And yeah, reading some books is like pretty crazy. Like the food industry in the United States, especially, has like gone through like they'll pretty much, unless there is a law that specifically prohibits them putting something in the food, they can and they will put it in there. And if there is a law that prohibits it, it's probably because they have put it in there and someone's found out and it was bad.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I'm sure, there's a load of that here, but I do sort of feel like sometimes, sometimes the brazenness of corporate America is more shameless than it appears to be elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't have like the mental capacity, and it's like not my job to like break down like why, it happens. But I, even like as an individual, like consumer, like I can notice the quality difference. Like when I travel and when I go to the UK, like people like to joke about how like McDonald's is so much better in the UK and like how it's so much better in Europe, but like it actually is. And like same thing in Australia too. Like it's like a freaking like cafe in there, and they
Yeah,
have like
yeah,
pastries and
yeah,
they have like specialty lattes and stuff like that.
yeah.
And not to mention like the food tastes better because like the rules are different over there, and like the quality of what McDonald's is actually allowed to put into the meals that they're offering and the items that they're offering to the general public are higher quality, and you can actually taste the difference. Maybe I'm like doxing myself as somebody who like eats a shitload of McDonald's right now, but
No, no,
you know,
no.
um,
I feel like I'm gonna have to retitle this podcast to the James McMahon Food Podcast, but
oh yeah, it's a food episode. Buckle down,
yeah,
everybody.
yeah. Let's talk a bit about music.
Yeah, sure.
So, so so I guess I don't quite know how to say this really. So, like I say, I've enjoyed all your records, but
Thank you.
certainly the last record was like a very noticeable shift in
Hmm.
sound.
Hmm.
And I've read you talk about that. How kind of I guess the kind of thing I always think about punk rock is I always feel like it's not kind of. I like to think of punk rock as being kind of very organic music, right? That it's not kind of
Hmm.
it's not kind of there's not a lot of kind of architecture to it. It hasn't been kind of
Sure.
um, planned in any way, but it definitely feels like a record that is such a shift that I can't imagine how it happened without maybe whiteboards and you guys with blueprints and what's not. Tell me a bit about how that happened.
I mean, yeah, so like not to pull back the curtain too hard or anything, but it actually it totally did involve like whiteboards and like blueprints and like notes and planning and stuff. I think it was a culmination of like a lot of different things, like not to be like another band who like made an album during the pandemic, but it really forced us to reevaluate like having so much free time the last few years. It really forced us to evaluate like what we wanted to do. And like most anybody who performs for a living, anybody who relies on large crowds of people to derive their income, really made us think about like what do we do if we can't just like play a show or like
Right.
play some shows.
Yeah.
And in our mind, it was like let's have more music available. If the shows do come back, like we would love to have something that people can be really excited about and people have been waiting for, to, if anything, help us stand out in the eventual wave of like touring acts that will hit the scene again when the time is right. And with that, I think we were kind of at a standstill as a band of like what we wanted to do writing wise, what we wanted this album to sound like. And for the first time, because we really had the time to ask ourselves the questions like, what do we want this album to sound like? We really, I think, came to a conclusion that we wanted to try and do something that was more produced, that was more that we could hear on the radio, essentially, because I don't think that you can honestly say that about Best Buds or Puppy Love. Like, I think that if you put on one of those on like, FM radio, it would sound jarring and it would be weird. It would just be hard to grasp mentally. It wouldn't make a lot of sense because like just the production quality and the approach musically is so different from what everybody is used to hearing on the radio. And I think that that came from like two places, like not to, like take the fun out of it or anything, but like music has ultimately like become our jobs. And that's a great thing. That's a positive thing. That's an awesome thing. But like one of the things that this band especially has always had to like reckon with, since that first album came out was, like how do we balance keeping that afloat and like doing what is good in like a business sense, if you will, and also being true to ourselves and like, I don't know, not to be cheesy, but like artistic purity and like doing what this band was intended to do from the get-go, which is ultimately create a space for me to have self-expression, for our drummer Austin to have self-expression, and for us to, have our own voices in the musical world that we already participate in as listeners and as showgoers. And I think that this sound that like Sweet Tooth ultimately landed on, the kind of like late 90s, early 2000s, like alt rock, pop punk, super inspired by, like the one hit wonder bands like Fountains of Wayne and Lit, the Teenage Dirtbag like songs that just kind of just got in people's heads and had earworms and just like had this not complicated, but like well-crafted sound that was intentional and thought out, but also, like you mentioned before, organic and felt like it was genuine and like everybody was doing what they were meant to do. Wasn't like anybody was, figuring out some formula or like doing science in the background of trying to be like, oh, this song is going to be the hit and this song is going to be the hit.
I don't even think there's anything wrong with that if that's kind of what you want to do, if that makes sense, like.
Oh yeah, totally. Me neither.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like, well, firstly, I feel like I need to defend Fountains of Wayne.
Oh, you don't need to defend them. They're like one of my favorite bands in the whole world. I love that band so much. They're actually a huge influence on Sweet Tooth. Like you can probably hear it and you can probably catch a couple lyrics that are like direct nods to
definitely band. Yeah, totally. Oh well, that's good. We were getting on so well. I didn't want to fall out,
No, don't worry. I love Fountains of Wayne.
Right. That's sweet. And I guess, well, no, I guess it's that kind of thing, isn't it? Where it's like, I think if you'd kind of said to me, you know what, this is how we hit the big time, but there's such a kind of thoughtful answer there that I get it. And I think the song's really good. And I also think the bands do the same thing over and over again. Like, kind of, what's the point? Mm-hmm. I guess, like, to play devil's advocate, like, if you were a fan of that earlier stuff, which, I am a big fan of that, and I do feel like there's almost like more of a bit of an indie rock sound, I think, for a lot of those songs. If you're a fan of that music, do you feel like there's a place for people to come along with that, or are they sort of, it's a bit like, well, this is what we do now, so sorry?
So yeah, that's a big ask, and that's a big what if, and that's a big part of that formula. And that question is like, how do we not alienate? Because another thing that I haven't mentioned yet is like, I have a ton of respect and I have a ton of appreciation for everybody who has invested in this band and who has invested in those older songs and in those old records and who have allowed us to be a part of their lives and to be a part of their journey. And like people have now gone and started bands and started making their own music inspired by that. And that's like, amazing. And I don't want to dishonor that. And I don't want to alienate anybody who fell in love with this band or cares about this band for those reasons. And that's actually part of the reason why we landed on this genre and this sound specifically, because we asked ourselves the question, is like, how do we do that? How do we not alienate? Like, what is it about this band that people already like, that people already identify with, which are like hardcore. Those are hard questions. Those are like not fun questions to always ask yourself, like when you're like a group of friends, or, you know, like a band who's supposed to just like hanging out and drinking together and, you know, not taking life too seriously. But ultimately, like, I felt like paying homage to this kind of era of music that has never not stopped. It's never stopped being popular. Like, it's, those bands are still on the radio. Like, you see the resurgence that MCR is having right now. Like, you see how many people still love Stacy's Mom. You see how many people still love Green Day, how many people still love old Blink-182. Like, the impact that that music has had, it's still around, it's still popular, it's still influencing top 40 artists now. Like, Machine Gun Kelly sounds the way that Machine Gun Kelly sounds because he was influenced by that era of music as well. And I think that, like, for us, we didn't want to alienate anybody, and we hoped that we wouldn't alienate anybody, because those were the songs and those were the bands that I was listening to when I was in 8th grade, when I was in 7th grade, when I was in 6th grade, before I really found, you know, emo music, if you want to call it, or like indie rock, and started writing the songs that people kind of remember us for, like the early stuff.
Yeah.
And in a way, like those, like the songs off of Best Buds and the songs off Puppy Love weren't directly influenced by those bands from like a sonic perspective, but they've always informed who I was as a musician. They've always informed who I was as a songwriter. Like Bare Naked Ladies is like one of my favorite bands of all time. Like, specifically, like, you know, like their older records when Stephen Page was like still in the band. And
how old are you?
I'm 27.
Well, you're doing better than me, because I'm 42 and I had a bit of a moment. You know, I've worked for music magazines like kind of all my life, and well, you know, all my adult life, and you kind of get in when you get into those sort of establishments, like you sort of I don't know, it's almost kind of hard to be true to like the kind of kid that was in the bedroom with, you know, posters of bands on the walls, because you become you're almost dictated by kind of what's cool, in a sense, you know, or like kind of the bands that it's okay to talk about. Especially, that's definitely a thing in the British music press.
Absolutely.
But I kind of got to a point a couple of years ago where I was just like I don't want to live like that. And a lot of this podcast has been about trying to, I don't know, just almost like having the opportunity to ask questions about music that I like that I would have never have got a chance to at a certain magazines. Like, you know, it was genuinely a thrill to like speak to Lit. You know, that was something that was never going to happen, you know, at a certain point. So it's kind of wild, actually, that, I don't know, almost like you would say, I love the Bare Naked Ladies, because that's not something you hear a lot of 27-year-olds say.
No, and you know, I mean, I think that we're getting into. I mean, I love that you mentioned that, like, and that's honestly, it's part of the reason why, like, I like your podcast. Is why, like, I think you have somewhat of a different approach. I think that you ask meaningful questions, and I think that you have like deep discussions that aren't deep for the sake of being deep. Like, we're just having a real discussion, which is super nice, and you can tell like the inauthenticity, and like, when somebody, it's just their job to just like send you a list of questions, or just like ask you a list of questions and be like, oh, okay. And like, this is what we think people want to hear, and that's it, and move on. So it is, and it's cool, because I think that it is hard to find, like, it's taken me a long time, like, to get to a point where can be at peace with who I am, you know, like, not to get too much into like my own personal story, but like, the pandemic and the couple of years like leading up to it were not the best for me mental health wise. Some of it was being, you know, on the road too much and touring too much and being super heavily involved in what is a toxic like DIY like infrastructure. Like, I don't say that to mean that the people in DIY are toxic. I don't mean that at all. I don't think that the bands are. I don't think the music are. But I think that the things you have to do and the boundaries that you have to shed as an individual person to do well in that infrastructure and to be successful, it's inherently toxic to a human being, and it's just like not good for you, and it's not real life.
Um,
Um,
I mean, I can't speak. I mean, I was in band when I was in my early 20s. It did a load of, van life, I guess, but I can't speak to anyone, any punk band really, that talks about that kind of lifestyle without just being like, I don't know. There's good memories, but I just thinking, I can't believe I slept in that lay-by. I can't believe that
exactly.
I mean, it's just wild. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. Well, yeah, and it's like, I think it's hard for people who haven't done it to really, they would just go, well, why didn't you, why didn't you just get a hotel, or why did you do that?
Yeah.
You don't have a fucking choice. The infrastructure doesn't exist. Like, you can't just hit up a bar in every city one day after another and expect it to work out. You have to really take risks. And I mean, for any like band to any DIY band in the US to do anything right now, it involves you getting your hands on a 15 passenger van that is going to work for 15,000 miles,
Yeah.
and you and all your buddies climbing into it and driving your ass to New York City and back from San Francisco, and hope to God that nothing happens to you or any of your stuff in between. And that is like really scary when you're like an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's really, really hard. And I think that it just like, it puts you in a lot of positions, just like as an individual person, where you have to give up a lot of pieces of yourself, to make it, to survive. Because if you have too many boundaries, and if you're too uptight about where you're sleeping and about whose foot is touching you and whatever, like, you're just not going to make it. You're not going to survive. And
I mean,
you shed a lot of these things for the sake of getting to play music with your friends and getting to play shows.
absolutely. I mean, there's certain people who were in bands, kind of in the scene that my band were involved in, and sometimes we talk about the old days and
Yeah.
what this venue was like, or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
all of our stories are basically just about times we almost died.
Oh yeah, it's always the sketchiest stuff. It's always about like the time that like Bart hit a deer and like we had to hammer the bumper off of the front tire with a tire iron. And
Yeah,
this is while we're 100 miles away from anything, on like the border of Texas with Mexico, at least 1,000 miles away from home.
yeah.
Like 2 in the morning, AAA is not coming to get it. Like stuff like that. And it's fun to look back on, but at the same time, it is a trade off. And I think like I spent a lot of time really struggling and really grappling, not only with all of those things, but also with just like the identity politics that come into play of like trying to build a band that like ultimately has a platform and like has opinions. And, I think that social media ultimately has really complicated, I think, like the identity politics games, especially for bands, because like you now have this device where you can just, anybody who like listens to a song that you like is now hearing your opinions about like politics, or like your opinion about like your dog, or like your interaction that you had with your partner, or like your parents. And there's a lot of these like boundaries between like myself and the people who might enjoy the music that I make that just didn't seem to exist anymore. I didn't feel like I had very much privacy, and I didn't really feel like I knew who I was, because I didn't really have a chance to figure it out. Like, I was struggling with like, like my gender identity. I was struggling with like my sexual identity. I was going through a lot of just like, and that's not like woe is me. Those are the things that everybody goes through, especially when you're in your early 20s. And I feel like that was very normal for me to be experiencing all of those things. My brain was finishing developing, but to do all of that in somewhat of a fishbowl was really like not great for me. And I was in the process of actually taking a step back, and taking the year off from being in mom jeans and from playing music right when the pandemic happened, which was super ironic.
I mean,
Um,
it's wild, I mean, I've had such a, I mean, I've had such personally, I've had such an insane like 5 years really.
yeah,
Um,
same.
had like I have OCD, so I always kind of think about things very deeply anyway, and kind of get locked on thoughts, and kind of find it hard to move on from things. Ever since social media like reared its head, going back to the early days of like MySpace, like I've always found it difficult because of the way I think about things. Like it's just too much information, but at the same time, I'm a journalist and want to engage with the world, and I'm interested in different people's opinions. But like, definitely, I hate using the word toxicity because I just think that it's such a simple way of dismissing complicated situations. But like, I mean, it has sucked like a load of the belief that I kind of had in this music and DIY away from me, to be honest. Just the sort of how judgmental kind of people can be, or how simplistic people's views are, and some of the shaming stuff and some of the cancel culture stuff. And I just think that, like, if I'd been like a developing mind as opposed to a more kind of in a more sort of structured, stable place in my life, like you just said that about like kind of like body stuff, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I'm writing a book at the moment about OCD, about me being in music and having OCD, and I kind of struck upon this whole section that I'd just totally forgotten about, and I was just like crying when I was writing about it. And it was just basically about in my teens how I was obsessed that my bones were too big for my body.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically because I used to hang around, a lot of my friends were gay, and I kind of almost like I kind of felt almost kind of like uncomfortable with my own heterosexuality and kind of my
Mm-hmm.
masculinity and stuff, and really gender dysmorphia, really. And I just think that if I'd had to do that, like in the back of a van with Twitter in my pocket, I just think I would have found that too much.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and I think that like I gotta give props, to my band. I gotta give props to my family. I gotta give props to my partner. Like they were all there for me. Like they were so supportive, and they helped me through all of these things. They supported me taking a step back from music, from the band, like doing what I needed to do, like seeking therapy, seeking medication, like doing all the things that I think just like you need to at least try to do to feel like you're making progress and like you're figuring out more about yourself. And there's a lot that you learn about yourself over the course of like 3 or 4 years. And like ultimately, like I'm happy to say that this record was like very cathartic for me, and like the process of making it with my band was very cathartic for me, because I feel like it was very much a part of like my personal journey and all of our personal journeys in the band to like come closer to a place where we're more comfortable being honest about like who we are and like where we come from and the things that we like, and understanding that like being judged for those things or being pressured into caring about other things or caring more about other things is not necessarily like our fault or our responsibility. And, I think it was really important, like really snowballing off of everything that you said, like I get to a point where like I lose a lot of faith and I lose a lot of interest in playing music and like playing shows. And like I just, as a human being, like I can't let myself like get to a point where like I stop caring about making art. Like that's just a death sentence for me.
Yeah,
And so like it was really important for us to find something that felt like we were putting the fun back into it.
yeah, yeah,
And not that I don't like the songs off Best Buds or Puppy Love, but like I've been playing those songs for how many times I played Death Cup in my life. Like it's a lot.
yeah,
And it gets to a point where you're just like, I want to do something different. I want to do something exciting. I want to be like holding back my excitement to jump on stage and play these songs every night. And we really sat down as a band and made the decision that like, at least like I told my band, like, I just want to be in this band with you guys forever. Like whether that's playing for 5 people or 500 people or 5,000 people, like I don't care. Like I just want us to continue to have the time and the infrastructure to make music together and to like perform in whatever capacity that is. And being able to do it the way that we're doing now, touring, like having all of the resources, having the crew, having places to stay, like having that be profitable, like that's the easiest way to do it. And that's the best way to do it. So like, let's maintain that as well as we can. But like, I want to be able to say that I'm down to play these songs for the next 5 years, that I'm down to play these songs for the next 10 years, the ones that we're about to put out. Like if these are the last songs that we ever put out, then like I'm comfortable with that. And I would be happy like playing these songs for the rest of my life. And we never had the luxury or the time or like the self-awareness before to really think about that. It was really just like, oh, here's the first 10 songs that like we wrote, and that was Best Buds. And here's the next 10 songs that we wrote, and that was Puppy Love. And now it was like, oh no, we actually wrote like 30 songs, and like we whittled it down to, like 16, and then like we whittled it down to like 13, and like really tried to make a cohesive like piece of art that we felt stood alone, and that if anybody ever checked out our band and the only thing that they heard was this album, they could walk away from it being excited and being stoked. And because it's paying homage to all the things that informs our taste as musicians, and it's all the things that we loved growing up, like we really hoped that it would make sense to everybody. Like it definitely was a risk, and it definitely was a gamble, and like not everybody who loves those old records is necessarily going to hear like our explanation as to like why we made the sonic shift. Not everybody's going to get to have the conversation that like you and I are getting to have, where like I feel like it makes sense, which is, a bummer. But ultimately, I feel like those who do stumble upon that information, or like do get to hear a little bit about that thought process, I think it'll make perfect sense to them. And even if it doesn't necessarily bring them joy, because they also loved the Bare Naked Ladies in middle school, and they also loved like Green Day and Linkin Park and like Fountains of Wayne, and like they don't also love Oasis and Third Eye Blind. Hopefully they can find joy in the fact that like we really like these songs, and they're really, really fun to play. And we have gone and taken our joy back with this album a little bit. We've gone and taken back the things that we love about music. And if it was up to us, like this album was really like, if we could have, like a top 40 album, like this is what we would want to hear being played on the radio, and this is what we would want to hear bands doing and putting out. And it doesn't necessarily mean that like we're reinventing the wheel or anything by any means. I definitely don't think that we are. But it hopefully, like that's just what it felt like we needed right now, and turned out to be, I think, what a lot of other people needed too, like some kind of reminder or permission to just like give yourself, like with Sweet Tooth, you can just give yourself permission for 35 minutes to just like have fun, and like not take yourself too seriously, and not have to think about all of the pressures and all of the things that I think that stop us from enjoying music, like when we try to sit down and listen to it. And just give yourself permission to just have fun for 35 minutes.
Listen, Eric, this is all well and good, and it's very inspiring. But more importantly, this is the most important thing I'm going to ask you: is have you met Avril Lavigne yet?
I didn't meet her, unfortunately. I would love to someday. However, I know she's a very busy lady. I know that she has, like health complications and stuff, that her energy is very sparing and her time is very valuable. I did get to see her perform live when we were young. I was pushed out of the way by an entire mosh pit of people when she started playing Complicated, but it was amazing. It was super cool. I got to meet Mod's son, her fiance. He's really nice.
Oh, nice.
We saw him backstage, but no, I've not gotten to meet her, unfortunately. I would really love to meet Avril at some point. I would really love to meet Hayley Williams at some point, because they're just like huge inspirations to me as like performers and vocalists and songwriters and stuff. But I like to think that one day it'll happen.
I've never met Avril, but I have met Hayley, and I ended up in a bit of a Twitter spat with her once, which wasn't which wasn't one of my finest moments. But no, when I met her, she was. Do you ever meet those people and you just like? It's almost like talent is coming out of every pore. You just kind of like, this is stupid. Like I can't think of anything you maybe wouldn't be any good at. Maybe basketball, because she's not very tall. But like, I just can't think of anything that she wouldn't actually be good at.
Yeah, I think she's one of those people in history that are just like one of these figures that, again, like they just radiate like a kind of energy that just like everybody that they come into contact with just like kind of know that like, oh, this person's the real deal, like no matter what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I hope one day I would love to meet Avril Lavigne and tell her how much her music means to me. She was my first concert when I was in 4th grade.
You never forget it, man. You never forget it.
Never forget.
Do you know a band called Supergrass?
No, I don't.
All right, they're like a British. I suppose you'd call them like. I suppose you'd kind of call them a Britpop band. You know, they would be kind of like dragged into that kind of scene, that kind of Blur Oasis stuff from the 90s. But they were almost like more of a, for me, like I always thought, especially in the early years of them, they were more of a, not really like a pop punk in the sort of sense that we've been talking
Hmm.
about, like not in a Warped Tour way, but in a kind
Yeah,
of a very British way.
cool.
Um, and yeah, I saw them when I was like 14, and it just blew my head off. And I'm desperately trying to get Gaz Coombs, the singer, on this podcast, and to the extent that I've been sending emails to managers and PRs, just being like, "Listen, my life won't be." I'm really laying on guilt, like my life won't be
Yeah.
complete unless I speak to Gaz Coombs. So, listen, Eric, I've had such a lovely chat, man.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to come see you play when you get here, and I
Awesome, for sure.
will.
Which city?
I'm in London.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, so I
That'll be a
will.
blast. That's the biggest show of the tour. So
Yeah, nice. So yeah, I'll come and I'll tell you where you can get the best jerk chicken in London.
yes, I would love that. We would love that. Yeah, make sure you catch Oso Oso. That is, I gotta shout them out too. Like, we're so excited to have them with us on the UK run. They're just one of the best bands in the world. Like, Jade is one of the best singers, one of the best songwriters of our generation. So if you're coming, come early, catch all the bands because it'll be worth it.
Amazing. All right, Eric, man, take care of yourself, dude.
Absolutely, you too.
See you, man.